Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It is Business Monday. It is rainy and bleak. It is looking a little gloomy out there. I am Josh Fenton. This is the Money Man, Gary Sasse. Gary, we got some bleak weather. Some bleak news broke last week. Somebody I think we were both very fond of and had worked with, Ray Fogarty, former state representative, head of the Chafee Center at Bryant University, kind of the state's leader on trade issues, great researcher, innovator, really put that place on the map. Talk a little bit about your experience with Ray Fogarty, who passed away last week.
Yeah, it was a great loss to the state. I first met Ray when he was in the legislature, and we worked on a couple of issues, not always on the same side, but we worked closely on tax issues and issues of good government. And then when he went to Bryant, you're right, he really became Rhode Island's champion for national and international trade.
Yeah, really amazing job.
And everybody liked him. He wasn't a partisan bone in his body when it came to his job. He was supported by people at state government. He was supported by people in the business community. He was very highly regarded at Bryant University. It's really a great center that he ran, and he's the one that built it up. So he's going to be missed. But I found an attribute of his, in this day and age, really very refreshing. He was always positive. I remember once when I had put together an index and showed Rhode Island ranked near the bottom of this, that, and the other thing. And Ray said, "Now why don't you put together an index to show where we rank highly?" and he went ahead and did that. So an extremely positive guy who we missed. You know, the good die young, and it's just sad.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I knew him from probably, I don't know, 1986, when I was just a young staffer working for John Chafee. We worked on an environmental issue. He was a Democratic legislator up at the State House. Couldn't have been more cooperative, couldn't have been more teamwork. Knew him over the last 30 years. Worked with him on a federal grant back in my previous life for the cranes down at Proport, and his center did all the analysis and the study, and just really just a lovely person to work with, and is just going to be missed in Rhode Island as one of those people that brought people together to kind of fix things and move things forward. He really got Rhode Islanders thinking about international trade.
Yeah, he was.
No two ways about it.
We have too few people like that. He was a very positive force. He wasn't looking for credit for himself, but he was looking to get the job done, and he did get the job done.
Yeah. Let's jump to another issue. About 7 o'clock this morning, news broke that GE was flushing its one-year tenured CEO, Flannery, I think it is,
yep.
Who had been, I think, the poor victim of the mismanagement that had ravaged that company over the previous few years. GE was the worst performing stock, got bounced off the Dow Jones. I think the stock off of Friday was an $11 stock.
It was up today, though.
It's up 50, maybe 15%. Is it fixable? Is it just too big to fix? 320,000 employees around the world. A conglomerate of, it used to all make sense that it was all together. Now, when you see its underperformance, you go, what were they thinking? Solar here, turbines there, this thing over there, digital over here, and not a lot of symmetry, and a massive underfunded pension liability, which doesn't get half the press that it should.
Well, it was a conglomerate without a strategy. You had some really big personalities putting together, Walsh,
and then Jeff Immelt.
Jeff Immelt. And it was really based on an old design. So today they really had to write down about $23 billion with a B of GE Power, because power is a very volatile kind of industry. They had to finally recognize what the degree of their cash shortfalls are. They're going to have to rebase the company and figure out what their dividend policies are going forward. It's a massive change. Now, they brought in an all-star. This guy that's the new CEO, Larry Culp. came from Danica, which is a big company. It's an $18 billion company by revenue, employs about 67,000 people worldwide. It's involved heavily in medical manufacturing, medical equipment, medical design, environmental equipment, environmental design. So he was a superstar, in General Electric, just came on board recently. Flannery was a superstar too. He ran the one division of GE that's still doing very well.
Right.
That's just GE Health. But I think a couple of things are going to happen, and I have no, way to predict this. Everything is on the table.
Yeah.
Everything is on the table, and so you're going to see a massive restructuring. If I was a betting person, I would bet that the only thing they're not really going to put on the table is GE Health. That's the future, growth industry. But everything else is on the table. And they're going to have to put things on the table and do things in an extraordinary way to save this company. And I think Colt knows it. I think the other good thing that happened today, and I don't wish ill on anybody, but Flannery's leadership never was persuaded the market that the company had more value.
No.
And Colt has a little different reputation. I think he has some stronger leadership, at least perception, that the street may see. So it really says American. Charlie Wilson, when he was Secretary of Defense back in the Eisenhower years, came from General Motors, and said the business of America. General Motors is the business of America. I'm paraphrasing it wrong, but that was the idea. Well, the General Motors and General Electrics are no longer the business of America. It's very different, and Culp has a tremendous opportunity. There are assets there. But there's going to have to be some pain, some shedding, some focus to get this thing back on track. I think they can, but I think it'll come back as a smaller company. I think it'll come back as a leaner company. I think it'll come back as a more strategic company, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. And there are going to continue to be some losses because the new CEO is taking over the same problems of the previous CEO.
100%, right. And those problems have just, it appears to be pushed off another year. He didn't want to cut the dividends because he's afraid he would, trigger an even bigger sell-off than what he saw. There is that, the group that led to Jeff Immelt's departure, they own about 2% of the company. It's kind of a rogue investment group. They want to split the whole darn thing up. I mean, they want to sell it off in pieces and think that there's actually more value in the pieces than as a whole.
And a lot of American businesses have been ruined that way when you have these, nothing but corporate raiders, come in and they see more value in the parts than the whole. And they're example of companies that were once iconic American companies that, some buccaneer came in, thought their parts were more valuable, began to sell it off, and before you knew it was all gone. Hope this doesn't happen here. Hope they work from their core out. And their core, as I mentioned now, is GE Health. It certainly wasn't GE Finance. It certainly wasn't GE Power. They recently sold a company. Another next big piece I see being sold off are the investments they have in the energy industry. I think it's Baker Hughes, where they have about two-thirds of Baker Hughes, which is a drilling and oil patch type company. You're going to see them getting out of those industries. And if they can modernize and get out of those traditional industries and get into health, get into information, I think they have a chance. But it's going to take a tremendous cultural shift to make that move. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult.
Isn't it a bigger warning to just about every company in the world? Here's a company that was on the cover of every Forbes and Fortune, most respected company, top 10 in top rankings, you name it, they were the poster child for it. And in a very short period of time, 2, 3, 4 years, they've functionally imploded. And there wasn't an investor who didn't have a little piece of GE in some ownership structure or another. That anyone can fall, and that innovation, constant level of innovation, is critical to be able to sustain the types of economy we're in now, where it's just speed matters.
Well, no question. Look at the growth companies now: Google, Apple, Amazon. They're built on a very different model than GE was built on. IBM's another classic case. No one's buying IBM machines anymore.
Right.
They sold off their personal computers years ago to the Chinese, to Lovato. Yeah, the industry, the market, is changing, and you defined it, pretty correctly. But that's not to say a company like, GE can't add value if it stays with its knitting, it narrows down and picks the right sectors.
General Motors, as an example, sold off Saab and closed down some other divisions during the Great Recession, and now they're back and arguably better than ever before.
Yeah, with a generous support of U.S. taxpayers.
That's right. You especially, proportionately, my contribution was very small.
Well, we don't know that. You don't know that. But
Gary Sasse, the money man. Actually, mine was probably bigger because you're so wealthy. You're in those tax havens all over the world that you super rich folks are so famous for.
If I wanted to be in a tax haven, I'd move back to Tennessee, where there's no personal income tax, there's no tax on dividends or capital gains. Property tax, just for example, on a $600,000 home in central Tennessee, in the Nashville area.
Do they have $600,000 homes?
Yeah, that's not a problem anymore. But the property
with plumbing?
Indoor.
Yes.
But that's the property tax. Guess what the property tax on a piece of property like that would be?
$600,000 home.
In a nice upper middle class community in Williamson
Well, here
County.
in Rhode Island, it would be around $10,000, $12,000 a year.
Depends on the community. At least 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what would it be down in Tennessee?
$2,500.
$2,500.
Yeah. So if you want to if it's just about maximizing your money.
Listen, I know URI football's ranked 17 in 1AA. I think Tennessee's ranked about worse than Florida State.
So I have a daughter that's university president at Kennesaw State in Georgia. They're ranked 4th in that poll, so I should remind that to you.
Let's jump over to Washington dysfunctionality, culture clash, maybe at its height. We haven't really seen anything like it. We were broadcasting the CBS news feed of the hearings on I think it was Wednesday. Was it Wednesday or Thursday. And, traffic was off the chart. There wasn't a news organization that wasn't running the hearings in the Senate Judiciary. What's your takeaway from what that says about the state of Congress, America, dysfunctionality, partisanship, etc.?
Oh, it's extreme hyperpartisanship. And when you get to extreme hyperpartisanship, there were no winners. I mean, this made the Bork affair, look like Sunday school picnic. There were no winners. Charges came up, later. People sat on information they had till they could release it strategically. It was, very defensive. Very poorly organized. No one looked good.
Yeah.
Democrats didn't look good. Republicans didn't look good. It remains to be seen how Judge Kavanaugh will come out of this thing. But to this point, it certainly has been difficult. And I just have it's unprecedented. There are no winners, and it shows that this is the ultimate fruit of hyperpartisanship. There's no one on that committee that, well, with some exceptions, but majority of that committee, both Democrat and Republican, didn't indicate an ability or willingness to work through this thing and compromise. It became impossible. The Democrats had Merrick Garland, Republicans had, Bork. Matter of fact, what was most astonishing about this, because this guy is a qualified jurist, you could talk about his background, and more information may or may not come out, but 1 hour and 38 minutes after his nomination was made by President Trump, the minority leader of the Senate said he could never vote to support him.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what he figured out in 1 hour and 38 minutes. He may have come to that conclusion.
Heck, Link Chafee voted for him for the D.C. court. So liberals voted for him back, whatever it was, 12, 14 years ago.
He just had an R after his name.
Yeah.
They certainly could not have read his decisions, the ones they were concerned about, in 1 hour and 38 minutes. And so that tells you something, that this was never really the kind of process of advise and consent. And I thought one statement that Justice Kavanaugh made that was pretty interesting. This wasn't about advice and consent. It was about search and
Seek and destroy.
Seek and destroy. And that doesn't serve any of us very well.
Jeff Flake, senator from Arizona, probably maybe since the first time since John McCain on Obamacare, sort of stood up, put party aside, whether you agree with him or not on either of those votes, but said, hold on a second here, there's something bigger at play, and I've got something to say about it. And fairly remarkable. He said he could only have done it because he wasn't running for re-election. I don't know, I would hope that, brave souls do brave things regardless. Is that a little bit of an argument? I think the country, a lot of people in the country thought that his move, at least in the short term, brought some normalcy to the process and at least put forth at least some analysis by the FBI over the next week. Does Jeff Flake's movement in some way speak to Bob Flanders' candidacy of, boy, oh boy, not having any centrists in Congress is really a problem? There's no John Chafees, there's no George Mitchells, there's no John Bros, there's none, there's one Susan Collins. New England used to be full of Susan Collins.
Yeah, it absolutely does, because the only way you're going to control Trumpism, and the only way you're going to control people in the Congress who really are not interested in anything but their very narrow position is to create a problem solvers caucus. I'm active in a group called No Labels. And No Labels has come out for bipartisan solution to problems. There's been a problem solvers caucus created in the House. It consists of 48 members, 24 Democrats, 24 Republicans, whose effort is to work across party lines. And the project that we're working on right now, which wouldn't affect the Senate, I'm getting a little bit off subject, is to try to convince people not to vote for a new speaker until the rules are changed first, so you can open up the process to more deliberation and more participation. Well, the same thing holds true for the Senate. If you get senators who are interested in not giving up their principles and not giving up their ideology, but are willing to work across the aisle, then you can get a lot of things accomplished. And that's what Bob Flanders is saying. That's what Jeff Flake, represented. He kind of stumbled into it. He's been in Congress for a while. He hadn't stumbled anywhere until this point. And I think, he was right to slow it down. But it's interesting. The Democrats at the hearing were insisting, rightfully, I think, on a few days. Just give us a few days to get the FBI to investigate. And now you're getting all kind of pushback. Well, we can't possibly do this in a week. Well, that's pretty disingenuous. They got what they wanted. And somebody once, how's that saying go? They got.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, be careful. Yeah, so I think Flake did the right thing, and he was assisted by a Democrat, by Senator Coons of Delaware, and Susan Collins and others. So let's give it this week, and let's see if anything comes up. And I think there's a marked contrast. This is a partisan statement, but I'm going to make it. I think the way Rhode Island has been represented on that committee by our junior senator has been embarrassing. The first thing his testimony going through, what symbols on a calendar meant and explaining things that I really don't want to discuss, anywhere ever, was pretty sophomoric. And then to have somebody insinuate.
Maybe one of the most, listen, I worked for 2 U.S. senators. I cannot imagine that somebody calling up, I believe it was a phone call first, making an accusation with no proof, no staff analysis, no staff research, no one going out and talking to the individual, meeting with neighbors, qualifying the person, moved it forward to the committee. Committee staffers then interviewed Judge Kavanaugh and asked him about an allegation of rape taking place in the summer of 1985 in Newport, Rhode Island, only to almost immediately thereafter, the person who made the claim recanted it, and now the FBI is investigating.
It's worse than I was going to bring the letter that our senator sent to Grassley. And basically he said he advised this person who had a complaint, against Justice Kavanaugh to go talk to an investigative reporter.
To talk to an investigative reporter, pretty much simultaneous as talking to the FBI.
And that to me, shows a total lack of judgment. It shows this hyper partisanship, and I think Rhode Island can do better. But it was embarrassing to watch how our junior senator proceeded on this, and not that both the Democrats didn't have some points. I think the right decision was made. I think Flake was very helpful in getting this thing at least reviewed by the FBI for 3, 4, or 5 days. You know, that was good. That was all that the Democrats were asking at that hearing. Eventually they got it through Flake and through a bipartisan effort. But we have a junior senator that's sending a person who's made charges, turned out to be false, to an investigative reporter, not going through the usual channels of the FBI.
And simply won't answer any question to any of the media as to what took place at his staff level. When did he become aware of it? What was his involvement? What was the decision to send it to the FBI and to an investigative reporter? And, you know, does he personally know the individual or anything like that? It was a very, very, certainly the strangest situation that I've ever known about a United States Senator's office intervening in a subject like this.
Well, it was bizarre conduct, but it's, you know, I can't say it was out of character because there's an issue of the kind of quality representation that we're getting. Rhode Island is in a very influential, powerful position, and you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican. You just have to be willing to work across the aisle,
Yeah,
try
absolutely.
to solve problems. You don't hear the same criticism of a senior senator from Rhode Island.
No.
He's influentially works across the aisle, very partisan, and so you can be both partisan and be a problem solver.
Georgetown has a center that does analysis each 2 or 4 years on the voting records of all members of Congress as to how partisan they are. And early in David Cicilline's career on the House, he was part of a joint bipartisan caucus that he helped found.
That was the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah.
But I could tell you.
But let me just tell you, he's ranked as about the most partisan member of the House of Representatives over his tenure.
I don't believe he's part of the problems. Now that he's seeking a leadership role, he's less active in our Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah. And also that caucus group had very little successes to speak of with its original founding. They did have a bowling tournament together with both members and staff, and I'm not sure how that all came out.
They probably collectively bowled 300, yeah.
You've raised a wildly interesting issue. We printed it, reprinted again last week, and then we followed up with the 3 leading gubernatorial candidates about this idea that children in the state of Rhode Island should have a Bill of Rights, pretty much guaranteeing them fairness, no bullying, but a quality education. At the end of the day, a quality education. And we asked the 3 staffs, candidate Trillo begged off on a series of questions, including that one. Governor Raimondo spoke on a number of questions asked, but refused to answer on that. And Mayor Fung complimented you, but wouldn't endorse it. Well, how do we break that logjam?
Well, you know, let me just take about 10 seconds to say what we suggested. You know, we said that...
And conservatives like you don't like the ACLU so much, but is this a job for the ACLU to file a federal lawsuit saying that kids in Rhode Island aren't getting a quality education?
Well, you know, we've lost in state courts. We've had several lawsuits filed. You know, when we filed one with Buddy back in when Judge Needham ruled in our favor, and then the Supreme Court overturned him.
Yep.
And then Sam Zuri and Steve Robinson filed a suit on behalf of Pawtucket and Woonsocket. And the court said that there was an issue, but it was for the legislature to fix. Rhode Island is one of the few states that doesn't have an enforceable right for an education. Most states have at least a broad interpretation of their constitution that's a constitutional enforceable right to have access to an adequate education. We don't, and it's something we've worked on and something the governor has snubbed us about for 4 years, so the snub wasn't surprising. But what this Bill of Rights, you know, called for was more effective teachers, appropriate materials for kids, a pathway out of failing schools.
Crazy revolutionary stuff.
You know, transparent.
Surprised you're not locked up on stuff like this.
I should be. I'm subversive. You know, transparent assessments. We had all these performance things, and half the time they weren't transparent. And you know, readable, reliable information given to parents so they have some idea what's happening. And so the reactions were very interesting. Some I understood, some I didn't. It's like you're right. Alan Fung did agree with us on principle, but he said you don't define success by how a school looks or how a parent gets information. and the success is defined by how kids, the skills they get, and whether they're good citizens.
Okay, so at Mount Pleasant High School in Providence, Rhode Island, 9% of the high school students are proficient in English, and miraculously, it seems statistically impossible, 4.5% of the students at Mount Pleasant High School are proficient at mathematics.
No,
I mean, by staying home and watching reruns of Gunsmoke, you might have a higher proficiency.
and that was the
Because you can at least count the number of gunshots that the Cowboys fired off at each other.
But see, that was what I never understood about Alan's comments, because he said you judge the school by how successful the kids are when they finish it. Well, that's true. He's right. The output's more important than the inputs.
Sure.
But unless you have effective teachers, good materials, a pathway to
So how do they get? So there's an argument statistically to make the analysis that our schools are so bad they make our kids dumber, right? In the elementary school, our proficiency rates are in the 30s and 40%, even in the urban corridor.
Well, but
in middle school, it's down to about 20%. By the time they get to high school, in the urban areas, Rogers High School in Newport has the same proficiency ratio as Central Falls High School.
no, you got to make a distinction. Rhode Island's scores, at least on the National Assessment of Education Progress, on average, pretty much at the national level. Way behind the people in the Northeast, but they do good compared against Mississippi. They're rather,
Well, anytime you have to bring up Mississippi to justify a test score, you know you're in big
well,
trouble.
Mississippi's low, but we're the average. So when you look at it, our test scores are right at the national average. But you have the savage inequality. There's numbers that you mentioned of 4, 9, 11% of kids being proficient in math or reading or on our urban schools. That's where the population is growing, and there's really a savage inequality, and that savage inequality won't be addressed unless kids, I'm going to repeat myself, unless kids have effective teachers, have access to good materials, can get out of bad schools, and it's transparent and the parents are encouraged to participate. That's what the Bill of Rights is about. And those kids are going to be trapped, generations that have been trapped, and no one's going to get out. So I didn't understand Alan's statement. He says it's a good idea, but we have to judge by the success of the school. Well, unless you have these things, you're not going to have successful schools. Governor Raimondo's statement was interesting because she pretends to be the education governor, talking about preschool and computers in schools. But if you look at the hard numbers and you say, what was our performance levels 4 years ago compared to most recent, you don't see the needle moving.
You do not.
Very much. And you don't see as many.
Incrementally. In certain districts.
Yeah, but not where the kids are really having trouble. No. And so I think if a governor was going to be the education governor, it's fine to talk about preschool and computers in schools, though I think some of the claims are a little bit exaggerated, but those are good programs. They're moving in the right direction, but you can't talk about that unless you talk about what we're going to do to make our schools more equitable, and by that I mean access. You can't mandate results, but you can give people an opportunity to have an adequate education.
I think the governor deserves credit on pre-K, full-day kindergarten statewide, pushing applications of technology into core learning, but it seems to be, that's at about 5%, and there's just no urgency. Mayor Diosa was on here the other day, and he said, well, we're not going to fix it overnight. I said, those have been the test scores since I was on the city council in 1995. I said, when's overnight?
Let me tell you, he's sure as hell not advocating for his people, because Central Falls was taken over by the state. It's so bad. The results since.
And by the way, that was about 30 years ago.
Yeah, I was doing the Sunland administration. I was involved.
DePreet, I think.
No, I was. I was
Sunland?
did the negotiation. I was in Sunland administration. It was 1991, I think. Anyhow, and for a mayor of a city, to say, well, it takes time, he is subjecting another generation of his citizens to failure, and that is an inexcusable comment for him to make. And I don't understand why some of the people, who were well motivated, certainly socially, conscious on the left, can't see that the civil rights issue of the time is education.
Absolutely.
So you talk about kids, better preschool, better all-day kindergarten. But if you get into an elementary school after those advantages, those opportunities, I should say, and in third grade, you're not taught well in the first, second, and third grade, the progress you made by going to the preschool, the all-day kindergarten, is gone.
Yeah.
And so we focus on all these other things, and everyone is recognized, the government recognizes, among others, that if a kid is not reading at level by the fourth grade, the chances of success are pretty limited. And that we have to get back to the fundamentals and that kind of focus, and that's what the Student Bill of Rights was about.
Well done, well said. Want to thank you so much. The
Pleasure.
Money Man on again. I know you have to rush out, but don't worry about Providence. They can't even get the kids to school with the bus drivers strike going on day 3, I think it is. Thank you so much for being on. We're going to be right back at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center with Saul Kaplan from the Business Innovation Factory. He'll have the solution to fixing Rhode Island schools. He'll have it done before the next BIF next September. I think he'll guarantee it on air. We'll be right back.